God honors those who honor him. 1 Samuel 2:30. You are listening to Second Chance Ministry Radio. The following is entitled Bad Girls of the Bible. Enjoy and have a glorious day.
9. Out of Step. Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Lewis Carroll. One look at her father's bead-colored face told Michelle all she needed to know. She gritted her teeth and prepared for the tirade. "Young lady, you are not going out on a date with that... The Reverend's voice shook with intensity. "That friend of the family? That talented musician?" Michelle kept her voice steady and her tears at bay, smoothing her hands across her jeans to calm herself. "You always said Dave was the most gifted worship leader you'd ever met, Daddy. You haven't changed your mind, have you?" Dumb question. Her father had changed his mind about Dave, their youthful minister of music, for one reason. Dave was good. Too good. After years of being known as the biggest congregation in Oklahoma City, then suffering a steady decline in membership, Rockstone Community Church had suddenly started increasing in numbers and in spirit. Something bordering on enthusiasm had tiptoed into the worship services. The reason was obvious. Dave. They called him the Music Man. Week after week, the time allotted for worship grew from 2 hymns and a special number to 4 hymns, then 6. Some weren't even in the hymnal. Because Michelle's father was adamant church was to last 1 hour and not a minute longer, that time was borrowed from his sermon. The congregation was thrilled. The Reverend was not. Michelle loved her father despite his stubborn pride, his ties to tradition, and his refusal even to consider updating their worship services. "You don't have to come all the way into the 21st century, Daddy," she teased him gently one morning. "Even the 1970s would be good." He wouldn't hear of it. Worship to him meant singing all 8 verses of a hymn written by a long-dead composer, followed by the offering, an organ interlude, his 40-minute sermon, and a prayer of dismissal. 11 to noon, then off to Sunday brunch. See you next week. Dave, however, put a wrinkle in her father's smooth style. After an especially moving choral number one Sunday, the church accidentally broke into applause. When Mrs. Magruder shouted out a hearty amen in the middle of one of Dave's impassioned solos, Michelle knew the music minister's days were numbered. She eyed the door, anxious to escape her father's angry countenance. "Daddy, I gotta go. Dave is expecting me to meet him for a movie. I'll see you later." A tinge of guilt pierced her heart as she grabbed her jacket and slipped out the front door. She couldn't bear watching her father's bitterness and jealousy harden his heart to granite. When she got home that night, another stern lecture awaited her. She was not to see Dave, period. She had to see Dave, often. The tug-of-war took its toll on her heart. Michelle stopped talking about Dave, stopped trying to convince her father to change, stopped pretending she wasn't falling in love with her music man. It all came to a head one stormy Sunday afternoon. The wide Oklahoma sky was packed with steel-colored clouds, heavy with rain, as she and Dave scurried across the parking lot of the Sooner or Later Grill, far across town from Rockstone's after-church crowd. Thunder rumbled ominously overhead. The storm was a heartbeat away. Seconds later, squeezed into the same side of the booth, their backs to the entrance, they didn't hear the door crash open like a clap of thunder, didn't see the Reverend come barreling through with his trench coat flapping, didn't know he was pointed like an Apache arrow straight at them. By the time Michelle spotted him, it was too late. "Isn't this a pretty picture?" Her father was visibly trembling. His rage was so acute. "After I forbade you to see him, Michelle, you deliberately disobeyed me. Daddy, I... She felt as though a pipe organ had landed on her chest. Dave leaped to her rescue. "Reverend, this enough!" The older man banged his fist on the table for emphasis, sending their water glasses dancing. "My daughter may be 18, but she still lives under my roof. Your relationship, or whatever you call it, is over, effective immediately." He pointed toward the door with a shaking finger. "Michelle, my car is in the parking lot. I expect you in the front seat within 30 seconds. She caught a glimpse of Dave's anguished expression as her father dragged her out of the booth and shoved her toward the door. "No, Daddy!" Her sobbing pleas were ignored. Stumbling toward the door, her cheeks on fire, she rehearsed the things she would say in apology when Dave called later. He will call, won't he? Surely he would. Dave braced himself against the corner of the booth, a dozen emotions vying for his attention. It took every ounce of self-control that God could provide to keep from punching the man's lights out. It seemed the sentiment was mutual. The Reverend's voice dropped to a menacing pitch. "And you, Dave, you can sing your tune for some other man's daughter. Mine is spoken for." Dave gulped and prayed for strength. "That's right, sir. Michelle is mine." The older man's laugh was a derisive snicker, devoid of humor. "I beg to differ. Phil Trimble has asked me for her hand in marriage. She's going to be thrilled when I tell her the answer is yes." "Phil who?" Dave was stunned to silence. Michelle had mentioned a friend named Phil in her adult Bible class, but not with any hint of feelings for the guy, romantic or otherwise. He slid to the edge of the booth. "Sir, I'd like to talk with Michelle about this, if you don't mind." "I do mind." The Reverend planted his hands on the table, his face the exact color of his blood-red tie. "If you call our house, I'll have the number changed. If you darken the door of our home again, I'll have you arrested. If you even think about interfering with my daughter's marriage plans, I'll make very certain you're never on the staff of any church in this state." The man leaned forward, lowering his voice to a growl. "Don't think I can't do it, son. I carry a big stick in our state association. I'll run your sorry self out of town faster than you can play 2 notes on that baby grand at Rockstone." Dave knew all about the man's formidable sway. Truth be told, it was why he'd shown an interest in Michelle in the first place, until his guilty conscience had forced him to back away, just in time for Michelle to throw herself at him. He'd caught her with open arms. Michelle. His heart tightened in a knot. How could she even consider a proposal from another man and never have given him the slightest hint he wasn't the only one? Obviously her true colors had remained under wraps. Until now. Dave slid against the back of the booth, defeated. On top of everything else, the thought of the most powerful senior pastor in Oklahoma City making his life miserable was more than he could bear. "Have no fear, sir." His voice was low but steady. "I won't be calling Michelle again. You can count on it." Michelle tossed her car keys and coral folder on the kitchen counter. "Phil, I'm home." No answer. There's a nice surprise. In a dozen years of marriage, he'd seldom given her much breathing space. An empty house would be a blessing for a change. She dropped onto the couch in an exhausted heap, her head pounding from a grueling Wednesday night at church. They were doing an 18th century cantata for Easter, her father's favorite in a Rockstone tradition. Except for the year Dave had led Easter worship, with the choir stretched around the sanctuary, waving palm branches and singing some upbeat version of Hosanna in the Highest with a full-throttle brass section. Michelle shuddered at the memory, then chuckled as she grabbed the remote control for the television. Why she'd fallen for his boyish charm so long ago was anybody's guess. Must have been the curly hair and soft brown eyes. Or your soft brain, silly. When her father explained why he'd been forced to make such a scene at the Sooner or Later Grill that afternoon long ago, it had all made sense. He described in painful detail how David tried to use her to earn brownie points with him and the other denominational leaders, how David undermined her own father's ministry, with plans for more of the same in the years to come, how Dave had no intentions of ever marrying Michelle. In fact, he'd been seen with a certain girl named Abby several Sunday nights running. The saddest truth of all, Dave never called her again. Never. He'd tendered his resignation, claiming doctrinal differences, and left town to start his own ministry. It all added up to good riddance, she decided. When her father introduced her to Phil Trimble, it seemed like a match made in, well, if not heaven, at least Oklahoma City. He was safe, he was attentive, and he never tried to rock the boat at her father's church. Just the opposite, he was an active deacon and faithful tither. Though their marriage had little passion, it also had little pain. Her husband worshipped her almost to the point of embarrassment. But after Dave's dishonesty, then desertion, Phil was blessedly dependable. Michelle slipped off her too tight shoes and surfed through the channels, barely pausing at each program, until a familiar face suddenly flashed across her screen. Speak of the devil! There was Dave, dressed in black, banging on an electronic keyboard for all it was worth, while a gaggle of shapely females with headset microphones crooned in the background, flashing 100-watt smiles at the camera. So Dave is on tour again. His ministry had exploded to the national level a few years back. Sold-out concerts, chart-topping CDs, custom T-shirts, the works. She found it all a little excessive, distasteful even. Good thing she hadn't ended up with him. Liar. Michelle groaned and flopped over on a pile of pillows. No use pretending she didn't think about him, dream about him, wonder how he was doing. Despite her predictable life with Phil, hardly a day went by that didn't include some small memory of Dave. She turned the volume up a little, then soon found herself leaning forward to get a better look at him. The years had been exceedingly kind to the man. His hair was still a curly mane, his eyes glowed with intensity. She felt something inside her begin to uncurl, a knot of bitterness being released, and a spark of interest take its place. Oh, Dave. The shrill ring of the phone launched Michelle to her feet with a breathless start. She answered it, certain it was Phil telling her he'd be home at precisely 9:25. "Hi, Michelle," a male voice purred. "It's your old music man." Her knees started to buckle under her. "Dave? But I was just watching you." "On TV, huh? We taped that service last week in Dallas." The warmth of his voice stirred her heart like a silver spoon swirling honey into hot tea. "I'm in town, Michelle. Hope it's okay. I just wanted to give you a call." "Dave, I can't believe. After so many years." She sat down with an ungraceful thump, looking at the handsome man on screen and realizing the same man was on the other end of her phone line. "You look great." Stupid. Thanks." He cleared his throat, obviously embarrassed by her outburst. "The reason I called is I'm leading a citywide worship service at the Myriad Convention Center downtown tomorrow night. I thought you might like a ticket." Her heart was beating so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Go to the Myriad for church? Alone? Downtown? The idea was absurd and absolutely wonderful. She found herself agreeing to go, taking down directions, hanging on every word as he caught her up on the last dozen years of his ministry. She bided her time, working up her confidence until she finally asked him, "Dave, I gotta know, why now? Why me?" Silence sang across the phone line. "Michelle, don't you know? You were always my first girl. Nothing can change that." His sincerity was obvious. His voice, his charisma, and the good-looking man staring back at her from the television screen managed to turn Michelle into a stammering teenager all over again. Tomorrow night, then. She was so happy she could cry. When she hung up a few minutes later, she did cry. That's how Phil found her when he came rushing in the door at 9:25. "Honey, I tried to call you, but the line was busy." He slipped off his coat, then joined her on the couch. "Michelle? Are you okay?" She shook her head and sniffed. How in the world was she going to explain herself? She decided not to try. "Phil, it's like this. I'm going to a concert tomorrow night downtown. A friend got a ticket for me. I'm meeting my friend there." His eyes, always so open, narrowed slightly. "The only concert I know about is Dave, what's-his-name, that guy you used to date. Is that the one?" There was no getting around it, so she nodded with a slight shrug, hoping he'd let it drop. He didn't. "Who are you meeting there, Michelle?" Before she could stop herself, before she could think and reason and sort out her feelings, they came spilling out in a great gush. How she'd never stopped thinking about Dave, how she'd missed his music, his creativity, his zeal for God, and his gently insistent kisses. Yes, she even told Phil that. "You're a fool, Michelle." But she couldn't seem to stop herself. Phil didn't speak, didn't move, only grew paler by the minute until she finished. "Go then." His sigh was filled with anguish. "I can't promise I'll be here when you get back." However softly spoken his words were, Michelle felt as if he'd slapped her. "Oh, Phil, I'm sorry." She could barely bring herself to look him in the eye. "It's just something I have to do. Get him out of my system. Don't you see? I'll be home no later than 10 o'clock with the whole thing behind us." Who was she fooling? After a dozen years, Dave was still very much in her system. She spent the next day behaving like a nervous schoolgirl preparing for her first date. A fresh manicure, a facial, a zippy new outfit that didn't make her look 30. She scrutinized every wrinkle and suspicious gray hair. After seeing him on television, would he look as good close up? Would she? She hoped to get out the door before Phil got home from work, but he stumbled into their bedroom an hour earlier than usual, tears rolling down his cheeks. "Don't do this, Michelle. Please stay home." His sentimental slobbering made it easier to go, not harder. She'd never noticed what a truly weak man he was. Anger, like her father's, she could handle, but Phil's tears were just plain embarrassing. She left early, kissing him on the cheek and reminding him she'd be home by 10. The spring air welcomed her with a fragrant embrace. On her solo drive downtown, windows rolled down, she listened to an old tape of Dave's, gearing herself up for the service. And for Dave. She hadn't told him she was married. He'd never have let her come if he'd known. Good old righteous Dave. Nothing would come of the evening, right? Just friends, just music, just a stroll down memory lane. Before she was truly ready, she was turning into the Myriad's parking lot, picking up her ticket at the box office, finding her seat in the first balcony, high up but front and center, the perfect vantage point with a huge screen in front to magnify everything that happened on stage. A 20-foot-tall Dave works for me. Michelle shivered in anticipation, especially when the house lights blinked off and a hush fell over the audience. Colored lights began swirling, and the crowd started clapping as the spotlight illuminated one corner of the arena where an enormous wooden cross was lifted up with a deafening cheer. A dozen trumpeters in white and gold stood behind it, heralding the start of the worship service, followed by elaborately dressed girls with tambourines, then more young men with brass cymbals. The procession moved toward center stage and began to fan out, no doubt making room for the headliner. For Dave. Her Dave. How could she have convinced herself all these years that she didn't love him when it was clear they were meant for each other? Michelle found herself standing, straining to see, before she remembered to look at the screen above her where every detail was magnified. There. She was certain it must be Dave, since the crowd was screaming. He suddenly came into view, chin lifted, arms raised, wearing an ear-to-ear smile and a loincloth? Michelle gasped. Where did he think he was, Jerusalem? His skin was bronzed, which made his teeth flash their whitest, and his eyes sparkle even in the dark arena. She felt almost sick to her stomach as she watched him parade toward the stage in little more than a bathing suit, his movements nothing short of erotic. Well, not erotic exactly, but he was dancing. Nothing else one could call it. The man was prancing like a heathen. Behind him, some 24 young women were dancing as well, leaping and singing. Joy to the Lord, it sounded like. She dropped into her seat, her hopes sinking just as quickly. Dave, how could you? On the screen above her, Dave swirled, he swayed, he rocked, he rolled, following the cross up onto the stage. After a final flourish from the trumpets, Dave stepped to the microphone and shouted, "Let everything that has breath praise the Lord." The audience roared its approval. That was enough for Michelle. While the enthusiastic crowd settled in for a long night of music, she elbowed her way to the exit sign, fighting tears and nausea. She hadn't known. He'd been more reserved years ago, but this, it was unseemly and uncivilized and everything her father hated. She hated it too. Thank God she hadn't married him after all. Phil, the man she had married, her beloved husband, was waiting for her at home. She had to apologize, beg him to forgive her, do something. She'd lost her mind, that's all. Dave was nothing more than an old flame that had been snuffed out in an instant. "Phil, please forgive me." She said it over and over the whole drive home, preparing to kiss his feet if necessary, whatever it would take for him to welcome her back and forget the whole foolish incident. The house was dark when she walked in. An eerie silence filled the air. When she flicked on the kitchen light, a large note on the fridge caught her attention immediately. "Michelle, you will never know how much you've hurt me tonight. I want to forgive you, but I'm not sure I can. If Dave has thought about you all these years the same way you've thought of him, then I hope you two will be very happy. Phil." Michelle crumpled to the floor, even as the letter crumpled in her freshly manicured hands. From bold heroine to bitter has-been, Michal. Everybody loved David. Only one person on record loved Michal, bless her heart. The women of Israel in particular thought David was hot stuff, literally singing his praises. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Everybody loved David, except King Saul, who feared the young lad's popularity. And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Honey, Saul did more than eyeball the guy. He threw a spear at David while the young man was playing the harp. Hey, don't shoot the piano player. But the agile David eluded him twice. Then Saul offered David the hand of his older daughter Merab in marriage, with the understanding that David would continue to fight on his behalf, and thinking that David would fall to his death at the hand of a Philistine. No go. David's humility wouldn't allow him to marry the daughter of a king. On the other hand, maybe Merab was as ugly as a mud fence. Meanwhile, Merab's younger sister, Michal, was standing in the wings, watching the handsome young warrior poet as he played his harp for the royal court. In no time, David stole her maiden's heart. Now Saul's daughter, Michal, was in love with David. 1 Samuel 18:20. Her name, like the male counterpart Michael, means who is like God. It's pronounced Michal with a soft K sound. You're right, it does sound like you're clearing your throat. What was it about David that made him so irresistible to men and women alike, and especially to Michal? To begin with, like Joseph of chapters past, David was a looker. He was ruddy, with a fine appearance and handsome features. Other translations are more specific. David had a healthy reddish complexion and beautiful eyes and was fine-looking. A healthy, good-looking boy with a sparkle in his eyes. A fine boy, tanned and handsome. In other words, ooh, child. Not that his good looks had anything to do with David's being chosen as God's anointed one. Not hardly. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. David had a heart for God, and that alone made him attractive, not only to his Creator, but to earthly types as well. He also had talent. As a musician and a songwriter, David was without parallel. More than 70 of the Psalms came from his musical pen. What woman wouldn't love a man who could sing her to sleep with an original lullaby written only for her? But there's more. He was a shepherd, tanned and muscular from working outdoors. He was young and innocent, not yet hardened by life. He was crowned a hero for killing the giant Goliath. And he was humble, always an admirable trait in a man. Imagine combining the fighting ability of a Navy SEAL, the godly talent of a great worship leader, and the rugged good looks of your favorite Hollywood hunk. Are you getting the picture, girls? Can we blame Michal for hiding behind a pillar at court and sighing as the shepherd boy plucked the strings of her heart? How the girl's hopes must have soared when David humbly refused the hand of Princess Mirab, her older sister. Michal didn't even have to dip her sister's tresses in ink or tie the girl's pantyhose in a knot. Without any effort on her part, Michal watched as the bridal baton was passed down to her. Thanks to some court gossip, the word soon traveled to her father's chambers that Michal had a thing for David. And when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. 1 Samuel 18:20. My, what a loving, supportive father. Not. Saul saw this as the perfect opportunity to let someone else kill David without a spot of blood hitting his royal sandals. I will give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. 1 Samuel 18:21. The word snare, in Hebrew mokesh, suggests something that would bait or lure David into a net and lead to his destruction. Snare, as defined in English, means something deceptively attractive. If King Saul wanted to keep tabs on David's whereabouts, what better way than to marry him to his lovely young daughter? So Saul said to David, "Now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law." 1 Samuel 18:21. It's all I can do not to jump up and down here, waving my arms, frantically trying to get young David's attention. "No, Dave, no! Bad move, handsome!" But the humble musician had his own reasons for nobly refusing to marry her. As a lowly shepherd from an impoverished family, he didn't have the money, the necessary bride price, to seek Michal's hand in marriage. But David said, "Do you think it is a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I am only a poor man and little known." 1 Samuel 18:23. Saul no doubt anticipated such a reaction, since David had made the same argument when offered Merab's hand. The king suggested a different price tag, one that suited his own taste for blood, both that of this young upstart and of the hated Philistines. However, that's not how he phrased it for his attendants. Saul replied, "Say to David, the king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." 1 Samuel 18:25. Ugh, foreskins? Couldn't David just bring home their dog tags? Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. 1 Samuel 18:25. For Saul, it was a 2-for-1 deal. He'd get rid of both enemies in one bloody swoop. For David, it was the perfect solution. The young warrior wasn't worried about dying on the battlefield, not when he had God on his side. To his way of thinking, the price for his bride was a bargain. When the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. 1 Samuel 18:26. One thing bothers me on Michal's behalf. It does not say David was pleased to become Michal's husband. Rather, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. The whole thing was politically motivated. We're told that Michal loved David, but never that David loved Michal. It grieves my woman's heart to think of it. Eager to be welcomed into the king's household, David wasted no time earning his right to claim Michal. So before the allotted time elapsed, David and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines. 1 Samuel 18:26 and 27. Double or nothing for this guy. Why stop at 100 when 200 was just as easy? Did he count every last foreskin in a grisly ceremony, or simply hand the ashen-faced Saul a sack? Remember, this wasn't the outcome the king had hoped for at all. He was forced to keep his promise. Like it or not, his daughter now belonged to his sworn enemy. Then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. 1 Samuel 18:27. Saul was expecting to go to a funeral, not a wedding, but he'd stated the price in front of witnesses, and David had delivered twofold. And so the two became one flesh without question, but one heart, one spirit. Despite her godly name, Michal showed no evidence of being a woman who yearned to please God the way her husband did. David was called a man after God's own heart. Michal was a young woman who was after David's heart. David loved God more than he loved Michal. That was good. Michal may have loved David more than she loved God. That was bad. A poor pairing. Saul would have agreed, but for an entirely different reason. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, 1 Samuel 18:28. Double whammy. Saul had neither the Lord's allegiance nor his daughter's loyalty. Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy the rest of his days. 1 Samuel 18:29. Plenty of husbands have trouble with their in-laws, but fathom being the mortal enemy of your wife's father. Never Give Up Saul told Jonathan to kill David, but instead the level-headed son warned David, then convinced his father that David was their friend, not their foe. It didn't work for long. Once again, while David was playing the harp, Saul threw a spear at him. Maybe the king simply didn't like the song. Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. 1 Samuel 19:11. Apparently David and Michal lived in their own separate quarters, yet near enough that Saul could send over henchmen to do the dirty deed by daybreak. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, "If you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be killed." 1 Samuel 19:11. As a new bride, Michal wasn't about to lose her dearly beloved merely because Daddy said so. How courageous she was in this scene, not only in warning her husband, but in sending him away, knowing she might never see him again. Putting his needs above her own, Michal helped hubby make his getaway by the dark of night. So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. 1 Samuel 19:12. Clever Michal knew the ruse wasn't over yet, so she carried out a bit of subterfuge. Then Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed, covering it with a garment and putting some goat's hair at the head. 1 Samuel 19:13. The Hebrew word for idol, teraphim, indicates a household idol. God had clearly forbidden such graven images, which means the house of Saul had not completely embraced Jehovah God, no matter what sort of public posturing they did. Inside their own walls, they had idols. Big ones, if they looked even remotely like a sleeping David. What Michal wouldn't have given for the male version of one of those blow-up party dolls. Alas, she had to make do with the materials at hand, which worked, at least temporarily. When Saul sent the men to capture David, Michal said, "He is ill." 1 Samuel 19:14. I'll bet that was hard to say with a straight face. We must resist the urge to judge Michal for her deception. Like Rahab, Michal lied to evil-minded men to protect a good one. But King Saul didn't take ill for an answer. Then Saul sent the men back to see David and told them, "Bring him up to me in his bed so that I may kill him." 1 Samuel 19:15. Can we talk determined here? Saul's approaching madness was dotting the horizon. Whether he was sane or not, Saul's men did his bidding. But when the men entered, there was the idol in the bed. 1 Samuel 19:16. Sounds like they picked up the bed and the thing rolled out and went clunk on the floor. A dead giveaway. Word quickly got back to the king, who was not amused. Saul said to Michal, "Why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped?" 1 Samuel 19:17. Saul wanted to know why. He may not have understood her motives, but we do. Michal risked her future, her very life, for any number of reasons, including her boundless love for David, her delight in acting as the heroine, even her long-awaited chance to tick off her father. When we look at those possible explanations, one problem surfaces. What initially appeared as the selfless act of a loving wife might turn out to be the selfish game-playing of an immature, infatuated girl. Desperate to avoid her father's unpredictable temper, Michal lied again, this time not to protect David, but to save her own pretty neck. Michal told him, "He said to me, 'Let me get away. Why should I kill you?'" 1 Samuel 19:17. Michal suggested her own life was at stake. Few things would soften a father's heart like seeing his daughter's life threatened. Her accusation didn't paint David in a very good light, though. Was she sorry he hadn't taken her along on his midnight ride? We don't hear of Michal again for several chapters, while David hid in the hills and Saul sentenced priests to death by the dozens. David chose a second wife, the beautiful and wise Abigail, and a third, Ahinoam of Jezreel. What happened to poor, neglected Michal? But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Galim. 1 Samuel 25:44. Notice how Saul got around the fact that David was still alive and Michal's marriage to another husband was illegal. Men could marry many women simultaneously. Women could marry only one man at a time. Perhaps Saul was punishing Michal for her deceit. Maybe he couldn't bear to look at her anymore. Or Saul's intent may have been to thumb his nose at David and cut off any claim David would have to the royal family. And what was Michal's opinion of being handed off to another man? We're not told because, gulp, it didn't matter what she thought. As was so often the case with biblical women, Michal the princess becomes Michal the slave. She had no voice. She had no choice. And her love for David, a non-issue for father and son-in-law alike. Welcome to womanhood 1000 BC style. After the death of Saul, David was anointed king of Judah, but war continued between the house of Saul and the house of David for a long time, long enough for David to father 6 sons by multiple wives. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. 2 Samuel 3:1. Abner, the commander of Saul's army, was no fool. He saw which way the wind was blowing, and so sent a messenger to David, saying, "Let's make a deal. Make an agreement with me, and I will help you bring all Israel over to you." 2 Samuel 3:12. David liked the idea, but he countered with a surprising stipulation. "Good," said David, "I will make an agreement with you, but I demand one thing of you. Do not come into my presence unless you bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come to see me." 2 Samuel 3:13. "My, David, it's only been 14 years. We thought you'd forgotten your first wife. She was young then, fresh as a primrose in June. By now, the bloom has faded from her cheeks. Her tears are long dried. Another man has loved her for lo these many seasons. Get ready, big guy. You may not like what strolls through your gates." Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, demanding, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistine foreskins." 2 Samuel 3:14. He remembered the price, but not the princess, all those years. As one scholar noted, even though she is a princess, she is traded like a trophy. Why was she the pivotal point of this exchange? Politics. Her father was dead, and the kingdoms were being united. Suddenly, Michal had value to David, but not as a woman, as a trading card in a biblical game of winner takes all. So Ishbosheth gave orders and had her taken away from her husband, Paltiel, son of Laish. 2 Samuel 3:15. We can only guess how this must have torn Michal's heart. We can imagine her snarling, "Pish-posh, Ishbosheth! Thanks for nothing, brother of mine." Though Michal had no children, she lived with Paltiel as her husband, legally or not, for all of her adult life, and had spent only a brief time with David. Any woman would understand if Michal were angry, bitter, resentful, or despondent. Paltiel, also a victim of the king's whim, was devastated. Her husband, however, went with her, weeping behind her all the way to Bahurim. 2 Samuel 3:16. Interesting. He wept all the way, but she did not. Was she numb with grief, hurt, but resigned, or was Michal eager to return to David's side, even though he left her high and dry 14 years earlier without so much as a note, let alone a child in her womb? It was lame duck Paltiel's turn to walk away empty-handed. Then Abner said to him, "Go back home." So he went back. 2 Samuel 3:16. More battles, more bloodshed, as David conquered Jerusalem, was anointed king of Israel, then defeated the Philistines. Once again, there's no mention of Michal. What was she doing? We know what David was doing. He was busy collecting more concubines and more wives, at least 20 in all. David was a busy man, since 11 more children were born to him in Jerusalem. But what he wanted, more than anything, was to bring the Ark of the Covenant into the city of David. When he did so, it was a serious party. David and the whole house of Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with songs and with harps, lyres, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals. 2 Samuel 6:5. As a composer, David orchestrated a spectacular musical entrance for the slow-moving ark. Thousands marched, instruments in hand, creating a cacophony that surely was heard for miles. It was only natural that ecstatic dancing would accompany all that music. David, wearing a linen ephod, danced before the Lord with all his might. 2 Samuel 6:14. Ditching his robe, his tunic, and all other symbols of class and wealth, David sported only a simple ephod, a ceremonial apron or loincloth that probably covered very little of his manhood. David wasn't an exhibitionist. On the contrary, he wanted to humble himself and identify with his people as their priest, not as their king. How it must have delighted the thousands of participants who saw the mighty David celebrating his Lord with such enthusiastic abandon. All along the route, the generous king offered sacrifices, blessed his people, handed out cakes with raisins and dates, and in general, partied like it was 1999. While he and the entire house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of trumpets. 2 Samuel 6:15. Shouting? Trumpets? This was one loud procession, easily heard even from high in the palace. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. 2 Samuel 6:16. Is it significant that both of Michal's big scenes took place in windows, first when she helped him escape, and here as she watched him dance before the Lord? In the movie King David, starring Richard Gere, David criticizes Michal for not being part of the fun. But custom did not permit the wife of the king to participate in the festivities surrounding the ark. Instead, she gazed down from on high, distanced from David by more than a few cubits. It wasn't her altitude that was the problem. It was her attitude. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. 2 Samuel 6:16. His leaping was the last straw, but the haystack had been building for a very long time. David had deserted her, ignored her, married other wives, fathered other children, and neglected even to include her in his life until it was politically expedient. I know that David has always been painted as a prince among men and a hero's hero, but his treatment of Michal was a smeary inkblot on his resume, don't you think? Underneath the queenly gowns of Michal beat the heart of a hurting young girl, abandoned practically at the altar, then years later forced to share her handsome husband with other women. Imagine competing with the wise and competent Abigail, and later the comely Bathsheba, two among many who provided David with strapping sons. We identify with Michal's jealousy and shattered emotions. But when it came to godly obedience, Michal was off the mark. Even if she no longer loved the man, she should have joined him in worshiping God. But perhaps Michal never fully understood David's God, never openly embraced Jehovah as her own, never grasped the value of worship. David's dancing didn't turn her heart, it turned her stomach. Various translations tell us she was filled with contempt, disgusted, and that she just plain hated him. The exultant David didn't have a clue what awaited him back at the palace. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him. 2 Samuel 6:20. She went out to meet him? Ooh, the woman was hot. She'd been building up steam since the Flashdance number. The minute she saw him approach the house, Michal made her move. One minor note. She's called daughter of Saul here, not wife of David. Was that a clue to her allegiance? Was blood thicker than her see-through sham of a marriage? And she said, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today." 2 Samuel 6:20. Even on paper, her biting sarcasm drips from every word, disrobing in the sight of the slave girls of his servants as any vulgar fellow would. 2 Samuel 6:20. Michal had 3 problems with David's dance. 1, he removed most of his clothes. 2, the lowest women in the kingdom saw portions of David that were supposed to be the queen's territory alone. And 3, he looked like a common jerk. That's the Lizzie Revised version. Or as more scholarly types have phrased it, foolish, base, indecent, worthless, and my favorite, a dirty old man. The truth is, Michal missed the point. She didn't comprehend the purpose of David's dancing. She saw it as a passion of the flesh, when David knew it was a spiritual passion for God that set his feet in motion. David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord, who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel." 2 Samuel 6:21. Ouch, David. Obviously, his temper was heating up as well. He reminded her none too gently that the Lord had chosen him instead of selecting someone from Saul's household. "I will celebrate before the Lord." 2 Samuel 6:21. He made his purpose and his future plans clear. "I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes." 2 Samuel 6:22. In other words, "You thought that was bad, Michal? Baby, you ain't seen nothing yet. I intend to make a bloomin' fool of myself. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." 2 Samuel 6:22. David had spotted the green-eyed monster lurking in Michal's eyes when she mentioned the slave girls, and he used her jealousy as a sharp knife, severing their relationship for good. As one writer put it, he cut her from his heart. We are never told that David divorced Michal, nor is she ever spoken of again, except for one sad closing verse. "And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death." 2 Samuel 6:23. Still called the daughter of Saul. To me, that was the whole problem in a nutshell. Michal never left her father and mother and cleaved to her husband. To his grave and hers, she was Daddy's girl. In the same way, she never reached out to her heavenly Father, never gave her heart to God. Though her caustic words to David made Michal bad for a moment, in truth, she never depended on the goodness of God to make her whole. That last verse is a telling one. To die with no children was the ultimate disgrace for a Hebrew woman. Some commentators suggested that God closed her womb. I beg to differ, only because that isn't so stated. A more likely scenario? David never brought her to his bed again. She never knew him as a wife knows her husband, nor was she allowed to bed with another man and live. Hence, no children. Not that she didn't have the chance to care for little ones. When her sister Merab died, Michal raised her sister's 5 sons, only to suffer a mother's anguish when all 5 were literally hung out to dry on a hill at Gibeah. As King David's first wife, Michal had the opportunity to learn true worship from a flawed but passionate man after God's own heart. Instead, she threw away such blessings with both hands, then shoved her manicured fists inside the folds of her costly tunic, determined to be miserable forever. And so she was. What lessons can we learn from Michal? When God says dance, strap on your tap shoes. Sometimes we don't know what to do around Christians whose exuberance for the Lord includes lifting hands, clapping, or dancing. If we join in strictly to please men, our motives are wrong, and the Lord won't be glorified no matter how fancy our footwork. But if we dance unto the Lord as David did, even in the privacy of our own homes, we just might experience the same attitude adjustment that David discovered, including a whole new wardrobe of joy. You turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. Psalm 30:11. Nothing stops worship like unconfessed sin. Michal wouldn't have seen her unsupportive critical words as sin, but we would. She didn't merely reject David, she ridiculed his God. When the appeal of worship eludes us, when we find ourselves judging the soloist, the choir, the robes, the flowers on the altar, whatever, that's a sure sign that sin has hardened our hearts. As one writer phrased it, Michal was proud and cold of heart toward God, toward her people, toward her husband. Before we fall into the same trap, sisters, let's confess, repent, and start singing with a lighter heart. An evil man is snared by his own sin, but a righteous one can sing and be glad. Proverbs 29:6. Words spoken in the heat of anger are sure to burn. Michal has been called a divine looking-glass for all angry and outspoken wives. Yes, I see myself in her, and I don't like the view. If only I could take back every angry word I've ever spoken. When our tempers flare and words follow, they scorch the listener, but the flames lick at our own souls too. How many times do you suppose Michal eyed other wives with their arms full of babies and regretted her angry diatribe? Hot words may eventually cool, but the burn scars last forever. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, for man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. James 1:19 and 20. Wise is the woman who rises above her circumstances. Michal had a right to feel hurt, to feel abandoned, to resent how the men in her life, her father, her brothers, her husbands, passed her around like a moldy fruitcake at Christmas. Here, you take her this year. Yet other women in Scripture were similarly misused and still managed to transcend such situations to honor God. It isn't circumstances that should determine our actions. It's a desire to please God above all things. So easy to say, so hard to do, and don't I know it? Let's keep reminding ourselves, bad girls blame their situations. Good girls rise above them. When times are good, be happy, but when times are bad, consider. God has made the one as well as the other. Ecclesiastes 7:14.
You are listening to Second Chance Ministry Radio.